Ladies and gentlemen, I don't feel well. But alas, here we are. We're going to be taking a look at one of the bosses inside the Doom Tower that everybody should be farming as much as humanly possible, and that is going to be the Dark Fae. So every time Dark Fae comes around, every time she's in rotation, I like to kind of make a guide, a little breakdown, showcase my team, as well as talk about some potential substitutions so that you guys can farm this Doom Tower boss. Now, the team that I'm going to show here today works for every single stage, same AI presets, same stats, everything for all stages of both normal and hard. If you can't reach the stats of these particular champions, that's perfectly fine. You can tune everything down a little bit and beat a lower tier stage. Now, what's really cool about Dark Fae, and we'll see this in her mechanics, but she is kind of the boss that scales to where you're at in the game. So the faster you are, the faster the enemies are. The slower you are, the slower they are, right? So it's very new player, very early game, mid game account friendly in terms of how you can beat her. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the boss guide real quick. A1 attacks all enemies, 100% chance of placing a leech. So first of all, leech obviously is going to heal her up if she's taking turns. We don't want the leech and we don't want her taking turns. Simple as that, right? Dark Tendrils attacks all enemies, steals one random buff from each enemy according to the number of magic champions on the enemy team. One buff for each magic champion. Steals turn meter from each enemy according to the number of force champions. I'll let you read this, more in depth. Has a 25% chance of placing a true fear debuff on each enemy for one turn. That's going to increase according to the voids. And then it's going to heal her by 10% for every spirit champion, right? So, very simply put, Dark Tendrils is going to screw you no matter who you bring in, right? Something to consider. Fairy Storm. AoE, all living allies will team up and join this attack. Damage increases by 25% for each living ally. We'll talk about those living allies a little bit. Dark Abduction banishes one enemy champion and spawns a mirror copy of them onto Astranix's team. Places a true fear on all enemies, so this is your team, for one turn. Increases her dark energy counter by 1. Now we start to get to the passives, right? So places a perfect veil buff on her for 3 turns and spawns mirror copies of all enemies onto Astranix's team at the start of the battle. Spawns mirror copies of all enemies onto her team every time her dark energy counter reaches 5. So the dark energy counter that we've seen on the previous skill. Also places a perfect veil on her for every 3 turns every time her dark energy counter reaches 5. So essentially, every time her dark energy counter is reaching 5, she's going to mirror copy everybody. She's going to hide herself. There's not much you can do. Simply put, without all the Plarium mumbo jumbo, you get to the 3rd round of this fight. She's going to spawn your team, but going against you, right? Same stats, same blessings, same masteries, everything. So that's very important to consider. You don't want to be bringing tanky champions because that's going to be harder for you to kill. You generally don't want to be bringing revivers or really hard CC like an Armands or something like that. And generally, you also don't want to include champions with polymorph or wand of submission or those sorts of things on the other team. So this makes it a bit tough because it's very hard to use just your regular PvP champions for this, since they're probably going to have those things, and it makes it, just harder to complete overall. It also means that the easiest way to get through this boss is with obscene amounts of turn meter control. So increase speed, decrease speed, turn meter depletion, all of those are going to be pretty much essential. Now, she has an almighty immunity where she's immune to hard CC, almighty strength where damage scaling from max HP can't exceed 10%, all stuff we expect to see. But then also her almighty persistence where all turn meter reduction effects are decreased by 50% when used against the boss. So you can kind of scroll through here. You can see what Plarium says about this boss. She is nasty, but she is still very beatable. Now, Plarium, in their infinite wisdom, decided to give us a page that you can look at any point and see some free-to-play or mid-game friendly options to beat this boss. Right, guys? Right? These are relatable teams for everybody in the game, right? A 6-star Awakened Siegfried with 4 uncommon and common champions, right? You guys can do this on your account, I bet, right? Like, nothing to see here. 2 Newts, Samarius, a Cavalax, it's teams everybody can use, right? A little bit of sarcasm there in case you couldn't tell, but you can come in here and you can see your clan rankings, right? There's some people in here that are beating this incredibly quicker than me, unfortunately, but I'm still going to sit here and show you how to do it anyway. So this is my team. It's a fairly accessible team if you've been playing the game for quite some time. And now I do understand that a lot of you guys aren't going to have a lot of these champions, so we're going to talk about substitutions. So for example, the most accessible options here are going to be Yakaro, Eostrid and Newt. Yakarl being somebody you can pick up from the clan shop. Eostrid and Newt being former fusions, but fusions are only free-to-play friendly if you were playing at the time that the fusion happened. So, for example, if I'm looking at a piece of content and somebody says, well, just use Rotos, here's a former fusion. Well, I wasn't playing when that happened. So we're going to talk about other options here. So, first of all, we don't really have a good aura. We could put like Skimfos in the lead or something like that, but we just got Newt there anyways, right? His aura isn't doing anything. If you have a speed in all battles option, that's going to be fantastic. Now, it is worth mentioning that you can use speed boosters, especially Eostrid is very good for this because she has a turn meter increase as well as decrease, right? So Lysandra is going to be another good option. We'll just start talking about substitutions. So for the Eostrid slot, you can use a lot of different things. You can use somebody as simple as, not Coldheart, you can use somebody as simple as Diabolist, right? Because Diabolist is going to have this positive charge, A3, where she's going to fill your turn meter by 15%, decrease the turn meter of all enemies by 15. She also has an AoE increased speed, and she can place a sleep if you need some extra control. So at a rare level, Diabolist is fantastic. She is accessible for everybody who might be trying to beat this content because she's campaign farmable, right? So it doesn't get any better than that. If you don't have Diabolist, let's just go ahead and take a look at some other options here, right? So if we go to other effects, if we go to positive effects, if we go to fill turn meter, we have a lot of options that people are going to have. So obviously we have an Arbiter in here. If you have your Arbiter already, she's going to be fantastic for this content. We have somebody like an Ancora, who is another fusion who can do a turn meter fill on her A2. It's a pretty small fill though, to be honest. We have Marichka, you know, if you happen to have one of the best Void legendaries in the game. We have somebody like a Yoshi who would be fantastic for this because he's bringing an increased attack, increased accuracy, and places a true fear on everybody on the other team. He can also fill his own turn meter and whatnot. There's a lot of turn meter boosting options. If you happen to have Fina, if you have Tiramisu, she can help you a lot with this battle as well. So plenty of potential candidates there in terms of turn meter filling. Now, if we look at the negative effects, if we look at the turn meter depletion, wherever that might be, equalize turn meter, sorry, decrease turn meter, there we go. So we have a lot of options here as well. If you farmed up enough to get your Carnage, that's going to be an option, right? If you have an Armands, fantastic option, right? He's going to bring you that hard CC. Like I mentioned, just make sure he's not in Polymorph because that will screw your runs, you know, here and there. Valkyrie would be a good option as well, but the one thing to consider is that she's going to be a pain in the ass to go against. Lysandra is probably going to be best in slot for this if you don't have Eostrid. There are other options, though, as well, like Ruella, though she is a single target option. We have somebody like a Tomb Lord who has a conditional turn meter decrease on his A3. Fantastic stuff. Countess Lix is fantastic. You could bring in a Ursala if you have her, right? That's a fantastic option. We do have Archmage Bishop, who's going to be, or sorry, Archmage Helmet. I was thinking of Archbishop Pinthroy there, but yeah, Helmet is going to be a good option. We have Maneater, who can bring in his full turn meter depletion on the A2. Geomancer with his A3, and then probably the best in slot for the epics actually is going to be Deacon with his A3 combined into his A2 because of the extra turn mechanics. So lots of options for Eostrid Dream Song, right? Lots of options there. Now, in terms of Skimfos, Skimfos, if you're not familiar with him, I do have a champion guide. He basically steals 100% of turn meter, AoE decrease attack, as well as a debuff transfer to the enemy on his A3. So he takes all the debuffs from all allies, puts them on himself with the A2, then on his A3 he's going to transfer that to the enemy champion, which is quite nice, right? He also has a decreased speed on the A1. Now, the same substitutions that we talked about for Eostrid are going to be viable substitutions for Skimfos, because Skimfos is primarily here for a decreased attack, and he's also here, obviously, for a turn meter depletion. So if we look at other options for people who have those particular debuffs, right? So if we do a decreased attack, the options are quite low, but we do still have options. So, for example, Aox the Remember is going to be fantastic. If you have Tayrel, he's going to be sensational for this. Tiramisu, again, she's a very strong candidate. I'll drag him over here so you can kind of see them behind my head. We have Embrace, all those sort of options, right? So he can easily be replaced by any of these champions. You can simply just bring in somebody that brings turn meter reduction as well. You don't necessarily need the decrease attack. It's just a nice to have. Now, on to the damage dealers. So the primary DPS inside this team is, of course, Newt G-Nut. but also Yakarl the Scourge. Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. I brought in G-Nut because he has a turn meter depletion on the A1, and he has an enemy max HP skill on the A3. So 2 fantastic things we want. He also has an AoE, weaken and decrease attack on the A2, plus a counter attack on himself. So he's fantastic overall. If you don't have Newt, the next follow-up option would logically be somebody like a Marius. Although if you have Marius, you're probably not watching this video, so I'm going to continue to give you other options. In terms of standout damage dealers, somebody like a Tholen, a recent fusion, is going to be pretty fantastic because of his AoEs, extra turn mechanics, all those sorts of things. You can do this one of 2 ways. You can bring in just strong DPS, in which case you can take somebody like a Sun Wukong, though keep in mind you're probably going to want to block revive on your team so that he doesn't keep respawning on the enemy team. You can bring in somebody like a Nishak to just bomb down the enemy champions. You can bring in a nuke Hegemon if you have them. You can bring in your Thors if you happen to have them. You can bring in your Dythes. Any sort of just strong DPS is going to get you through this. In terms of the enemy max HP options, Cold Heart is definitely going to be the way to go when it comes to rare champions. Her Heartseeker ability is still one of the best abilities at a rare level inside the entire game, right? So decreasing the target's turn meter by 100%, and then also doing that enemy at max HP hit is an absolute godsend. We can also take a look at an option like Husk. Husk is very similar with his AoE, enemy max HP plus a stun, so he can bring you some additional CC there. We have obviously the Royal Guard options, who is apparently in my vault at this point, so there is Royal Guard for you if you happen to have Royal Guard built. He is a fantastic option for this, especially with his A3 with the decreased speed as well as turn meter depletion. Now, those are some of the damage dealing options, so again, regular DPS can work perfectly fine. It is preferred to have it in some sort of an attack champion, so I wouldn't recommend bringing a Harima, for example, because when the mirror copy of her gets spawned, it's going to make it a lot harder for your champions to deal with those mirror copies. So just something to keep in mind. You probably want, attack-based damage dealers. There's plenty of them in the game, though, so take your pick. Now, the last option here is going to be Allure. Now, Allure, same kind of thing as the Eostrid people. I'm not going to go too in-depth with this. She basically has everything turned off except her A1 for the boss, which is the best A1 turn meter depletion in the entire game, with the exception of maybe Newt. So she is incredibly strong. Still a very, very strong champion. Obviously, people were using her way back in the day to farm the Fire Knight, but she still gets work done even today. So if you don't have her, bring in another turn meter depleter like we talked about. It is what it is. Now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the team setup, which will show you all the stats, the AI presets, and all those sorts of good things. So with G-Nut on the round 1 and round 2, he has his Blessed Bash turned off. Now for optimization, I would say probably open with your A1 on wave 3. Otherwise, he's going to use this Blessed Bash into essentially the enemy, right? Like the enemy that spawned, the version of him that spawned. So I'm gonna optimize that a little bit. Eostrid has everything turned off for the first 2 waves, and then this is how she looks on wave 3. Allure does whatever she wants, and then wave 3 we have everything turned off at the A1. Skimfos, this is kind of how he's set up. We want the Clutch of Woe available for wave 3, so this is how he's set up for wave 3. And then finally, Yakarl is doing whatever he wants, except the Glaciate is turned off. And then we open with the Glaciate on wave 3, but then we don't use it again. Glaciate is going to give us that AoE freeze. 100% chance it can't be resisted, right? But then Blizzard Rider is going to steal the turn meter, so that's what we want against the boss. Now, in terms of stats, this is how we're looking, right? So I'm not going to read through all of them, but you can kind of get a good idea. Like I mentioned, this content is going to scale to whatever whatever level that you're at. So the lower your stats are on your champions, the lower the stats will be on the enemy mirror spawned champions. So we'll go ahead and we'll do this run real quick here so you can get a good idea of how it works in first person. The only thing to keep in mind is that at some instances on some of these waves, there's annoying champions that will place either unkillables or block damages and those sorts of things on themselves. And then with the amount of turn meter reduction that we have in this team, it basically just gets stuck in an infinite loop where you're not able to kill those. And, it is what it is. So if you're really struggling with that, if that's something that you're continuously running into, what I would recommend would be to go ahead and bring in somebody who can also buff strip or block buffs. So you might be looking at like a Mighty Uko, You know, Ugo would be a fantastic option as well. Anybody who can remove that buff, so like a Rosin Scarhide, ironically mentioning him right now, might be a decent option. So he has a turn meter depletion on the A3, and then obviously also has the buff removal on the A1, right? Because it's kind of like farming Fire Knight back in the day, where you'd leave the computer for like 2 hours and you'd come back and you find that you did one run because somebody got a block damage, and your lure just kept A1ing him and making it so that it never fell off, right? So I remember the glory days of Raid. Now, if you are progressed enough in the game to be lucky enough to have somebody like a Marius, a Ramont too, even an Arbiter with her buff duration decrease would be fantastic. Now, another thing to consider here as well, if you replaced, say for example, like a Skimfos with somebody like a Tholan, you're going to get through those waves significantly quicker because of the AoEs offered by Tholan. So I'm not going to show you that, but I think you kind of get the idea, because those waves took quite a while to get through. Mainly because we didn't have any sort of AoE damage, right? So that's something to consider. Once we take out the mirror copies, though, you'll start to see that the actual boss itself just doesn't get a turn. We basically come through here, clap her down without any issues. Now, you can see obviously that this content is significantly slower than some other teams, some other champions that you can have, but we cover all the major food groups in terms of champions that you need to have on your team to make this work. So if you're needing to get through this content, this is essentially going to be a very consistent way to do it. If you have better champions that you can substitute out for this, go ahead and use them, right? It's not a be-all, end-all, you know, this is the team that you have to use. There's always going to be a couple of flex options for each particular champion in the roster. Critically think about it, right? I covered the boss in its entirety and told you what it's going to be doing and what sort of stats you're looking for in terms of, you know, the not bringing defensive nukers and those sorts of things. In terms of the actual stat requirements for the stage, it's not something that I like to go over because that information is easily found online. It's showcased in every single guide that you might look at. It's something that, you know, is fairly well known, and if you're putting in the effort to build these champions anyways, you're probably going to have access to that information at another location, and it'll just needlessly make my video longer when I could be talking about more important things like how to actually beat this boss, right? Not just the stats that you're going to need. So that being said, we get through this in about 3 minutes. We do get the soul harvest coming in from the newt there that's going to help it. I will go ahead and throw in my Tholan just so I can kind of show you what I meant about how that'll make the battle a lot quicker. I'm not going to do AI presets or anything like that, so we're just going to go ahead and simply run this and see if it actually works first of all and how well it works. We have, of course, Eostrid Dreamsong, who's bringing in the increased attack and everything like that, which should make Tholan a significantly larger threat. We do have Soul Reap on him as well, so he can get some very good damage in there that way as well. Tholan actually is not even built inside Savage or Lethal or anything like that, so any of the damage that he's doing here is just with raw DPS stats, so you know, like your attack, crit rate, crit damage, all that sort of stuff. So if you have the option to build this guy inside any sort of a damage dealing set, you're going to get significantly more performance out of him. That's just something to consider. He does have that AoE A1 as well, which is quite useful. Obviously, if you had him in like a 6-piece Merciless, that's going to be probably the quickest way to get through those waves. Obviously, like you've seen on the top leaderboards and whatnot, somebody like a Marius is fantastic. Now, as you can see, this is the prime example of why AI presets are so important for this and why I would rather spend my time talking about AI presets as opposed to stats for the stage. We got wiped on this solely because of the fact that our Eostrid Dreamsong did not have her skills available, right? So she had to open with the A1, the enemy Eostrid opened with the A3 into the A2, and we got our cheeks absolutely clapped. So 9 times out of 10, if you're failing this content, it's not going to be the fact that, you know, you don't have the stats, you don't have the champions. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the fact that you don't have your presets or your skills timed correctly, right? And we're not expecting you to sit there and manual this content, but you do have the team setup options that you can make use of. So definitely make sure to do that. If you're trying to beat this content and you can't get through it, go ahead and hop into my Discord. There'll be a link down below. I have a Raid Shadow Legends dedicated channel where we're always talking about like sieges and different pieces of content, as well as bragging a little bit about champion pulls, right? So go ahead and hop in there if you're struggling with this, and we can certainly give you some help, whether it be, you know, figuring out the roster that you want to use for this, figuring out what's going on with the runs, those sorts of things, or if you just want to brag about that cool new mythical quad roll that you got with, you know, crit rate and attack and speed and crit damage or accuracy on it, right? You know, that'd be perfect as well. But all that being said, I usually say I hope these videos will be helpful. I know this one was, so definitely make sure to go ahead and leave a subscription on the channel. We are so close to 3,000 subscribers, which has been the goal for 2025. Also, make sure to go ahead and like the video if you liked it, because that helps the YouTube algorithm figure out what content is worthwhile to push out to new people. Thank you guys all so much for watching. I'll see you next time.